So the next thing I did was I worked from my initial sketches to designing the final sketch of what would appear on the final image. So here you can see this is my sketch of my electric character. I did this with pencil and paper and then scanned it into the computer so I could edit it on Photoshop. As you can see, the head is one of the first things I notice, and it's sometimes an issue that I have when I draw, is that the heads end up being too large. So I needed to reduce this in Photoshop. But everything else I was pretty happy with the way the pose worked out, and there are a few little adjustments that I made to his legs. But just the main thing there was to reduce the head size. The next one was my Earth character with the vine whip. So like I said, she didn't change much from the original sketch apart from the skirt disappearing. Her placement of the markings are pretty much the same as what was on the original image. I've given her a dancing pose. I thought that works well with the way that she would be using her vines as whips, so that would create quite an elegant attack, I thought. So that's the idea behind the dance pose. The last one is the fire image. So this ended up being the final image for my fire character. As you can see, this is what I was talking about with the eyes. So they're not human-like. They're mostly dark around the outside with a shiny bit in the middle there. Then she's got her fire, her curls that end up looking like flames, and her patterns are sort of more appropriate for a childlike character. And this is the flame that she ends up throwing. The next step in the process was to scan them into Photoshop and then make any adjustments before I started the color test process. So here you can see this is the first time I started recording the screen while I was working, and I've scanned in my image and I'm in the process now of resizing the electric character's head. So I'm using the lasso tool there to just, not carefully, but just trace around the outside just to get the basic idea of the head, and I'm using the free transform tool to resize it. Another thing I needed to do there was, he looks like, once I resized it, I thought, well, he doesn't look like he has a neck now, so I do fix that up a bit later on. As I've resized the head, the hair has then become out of place as well, so I needed to cut that out and then reduce that and fix that back up so that it was more appropriately placed to the back of his head there. So once again, I'm just simply tracing with the lasso tool there around. I'm not being very careful, I'm just getting a rough idea of where the hair is. And it can be a bit tricky sometimes. I have to do it a couple of times every now and then. And that's just simply because of the area of my Wacom tablet that I'm using is not very large. I haven't got a very big one, so sometimes where the pen starts, you can't always finish on the same image. So it does take me a couple of times sometimes to get that right, especially when I'm trying to cut out a large area there. Just reducing that in size and then matching that back up to his head. So that worked quite well actually. And at this stage it's just getting the size correct so that when I go back in to do the detail later on, I've got an idea of where everything should be. And it does change often as I'm going, but this just gives me a really good starting point. There were a couple of other things I noticed at this point, that his hand there, his hand that's further away behind his body there is too large, and I'm not very good at drawing hands. It's not a strength of mine, so I do fix that up later on too. Here I realised that I wasn't recording when I resized the rest of his body, so I apologise about that. But you can see here that not only I've changed the hair and the head, but I've also changed this hand here. I've made it smaller, and I've sort of redrawn it a little bit as well. I made this leg a little bit longer and thinner, so it didn't look as bulky, and I've also made this leg a little bit longer as well. You can see the cut mark a little bit up on top of his thigh there. I also sort of fixed up his arm a little bit there, made it a little bit thinner, and kind of fixed up some of the areas a bit so that he looked a little bit more in proportion. This is the original image, so you can see side by side here what the original image looked like and then what the finished image looks like. So you can see quite a noticeable difference in the legs and the head and the hand. So this is the part where I was working out the page composition. I still kind of had no real solid thoughts about what I wanted to do with the page composition, so I just thought I would get the characters, the sketches on the page, just in their rawest form, and resize them, move them around on the page somewhere where I thought they looked aesthetically pleasing. So this is just a fast forwarded video of that process, and once I had them in a place that I thought they looked pretty good, I did a little bit more resizing, moving around. I wasn't quite sure how I wanted my page to be at this point, whether I wanted it to be landscape or portrait or square. I hadn't quite worked that out, but yeah, I guess I just started by continuously moving them around, and then started my sketching of kind of what I thought I wanted them to look like. And yeah, I thought I'll use these leaf style images. Here I'm sort of drawing an idea of what the background will look like through these windows. I knew I wanted a border on my page, so I just did a really quick border just to kind of see what it looked like as a framed image. At this point, I still envisioned the background as a solid black and only my speed paint visible through those leaf-shaped windows. So I was still in that frame of mind at this stage. I thought it kind of looked like a three-petaled flower, so I kind of played with that idea for a bit. The bios in my mind were written in white on the black background in the spaces in between the petals at this point. So that was my train of thought. It didn't end up being like this, but that was pretty much where I started.